Once again, I thank you all for joining us on the launch of the 13th annual ASDA BCW Arab Youth Survey. We shared some of our top findings today, but there are so much more data and insights on our website, arabyouthsurvey.com. I now welcome you to a very special panel discussion to discuss the findings that will provide you with greater insight and context. Our panel discussion reflects the theme of our survey this year, Hope for the Future. On our panel today are three eminent personalities. First, Dr. Jihad Az-Zohr, Director of the International Monetary Fund's Middle East and Central Asia Department, who joins us today from Washington, D.C. Secondly, we have Dania Khalid Al-Maina, the CEO of Al-Ula nonprofit organization, who joins us from Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. And we have with us Faisal Al-Yafai, journalist and partner at Hildebrand Nord, who joins us today from London in the United Kingdom. Thank you, Dr. Jihad, Dania, and Faisal for joining us today. Let me start with the first question that is open to all of you. And the question is, what is your view on the theme of the findings, Hope for the Future? Do you agree with the positive sentiment shared by young Arabs? Let us start with you, Dr. Jihad.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you today. I like very much the survey this year. In fact, this year, the survey provides a unique opportunity to assess the impact of the COVID crisis on the Arab youth. And when you read the survey and the results that are somewhat, I would say, positively surprising, which I like very much that, they are, in fact, a call of action for all decision makers in the region. I think what the survey is showing that the Arab youth are still looking at the future with bright eyes. They are confident with their capacity to recover, and also they are entrepreneurial. I think all these results give us an opportunity at this moment where we need to not only address the impact of the crisis, but also to build the future and to build it better. I think here we have a call for action, and decision makers need to look in details at your survey and assess. Of course, there are diversities and there are also gaps. Those gaps reflect the impact of policies, and we need to reflect on that. But the lesson for me is we have now an opportunity that the spirit of the youth who constitute the future of the region is positive, and usually having a positive spirit, it's the first step in building confidence that helps in accelerating any recovery in the economy.
Indeed, Dr. Jihad, I think that is very important for you. I'd like to ask Dania, what is your view on the optimism that has come through from the Arab youth across these 17 nations?
Right. Let me start off by telling you a little bit about what we do at Al-Ula. Al-Ula nonprofit is the first nonprofit in Saudi Arabia that focuses on fighting poverty through early intervention, meaning that we work with the children and the youth from an early age and try to develop their 21st century skills to get them ready for the changing market. And I think hope for the future is very refreshing. And it really tells you about the attitude of the youth. They're more optimistic, they're more excited about what's the future. We see that on the ground, and I'm very happy to see that also being reported in the findings. And I think optimism will really energize countries and regions. With optimism comes also creativity, new job creations. As we see, the youth now are more creative. They no longer want to get a steady job as a government job as their fathers did. It's more about doing what they love and what they're passionate about. And I see that this is reflected in the findings. So Indeed. It's very refreshing. Hope for the future is a wonderful way to start.
Indeed, and so important for the kingdom with 70% of its population below the age of 30, such a young demographic. So this is a very, very positive signal, I'm sure, for the kingdom and its future plans as well. But with optimism come challenges. Optimism raises expectations, and governments and private sector need to be able to deliver that. So Faisal, what do you think of that? What does optimism mean? Does it mean an increased challenge?
Yeah, I mean, of course. I think the panel said it very nicely, that when you have such refreshing views from young people in the midst of a global pandemic and in the midst of all of these different challenges that we have in the region, conflict and so on, I do think the right way to look at it is as a call to action. I think Jihad is absolutely right about that. You have to see it as an opportunity for those people who are in power, those people who have the political levers, who are able to provide political analysis, all of these things. These are the things that we need to focus on in order to make that optimism real, because that optimism it's so exciting to see. The Arab youth, all of you have spent time around Arab youth, as you say, the largest demographic in Saudi Arabia, 70% of the country. This is a rising generation, and we have to make sure that we put the structures in place so that rising generation, when they come to the employment market, when they finish education, they are able to make their lives in the optimistic way that they want. Not that they have to look to us and say, well, you guys failed us. We had all this optimism, we had all this excitement, even in the midst of a pandemic, and you couldn't make it real for us.
Indeed, as Dr. Jihad said earlier, optimism is exciting. It provides us an opportunity. But asking about, you are an expert, Dr. Jihad, in driving policy recommendations for the region's most important concerns: jobs, unemployment, government deficits, for instance. What measures do you suggest that regional governments need to take to meet the high expectation of the Arab youth?
Sunil, also, if we read well your survey, we have the answers for your question. What the youth are telling us: they have aspiration, they are ready to take risk, they see the future positively, but also they recognize the challenges that they are facing, they see the issues very clearly, and what to do. One is to invest in talent. When you have 70% of your population or so below 30, this is where your future is. This is where your energy is. This is where your capital is. Investing in talent is your best commodity. And for that, you need to improve education, develop a I would say, education capacity development programs in order to allow people to change career, change job, especially after the crisis that has affected sectors in a very intensive way. Also, we need to open the market through financial inclusion, allow young entrepreneurs to have access to capital, to have access to finance. Open the markets too by also giving them the right playing field and reduce the weight of the state in the economic management. This is an important priority for all governments in the region. The second one is social. Social is becoming at the center of any economic policy. You need new social compact. And this social compact has to be a citizen-based social protection system. This crisis also showed us the weaknesses that we have in our social system. Thinking about the silver linings of the future, digitalization played an important role in protecting lives during the crisis. It could be also a savior for jobs if we invest in it. We need to think about the climate change. We need to think about the future of our region and the world. We have tremendous changes taking place, and we have the capacity to succeed. We saw things that in the last 2 years, nobody expected that to happen. I think here also, we need to focus our attention. Last but not the least, rebuild trust. Trust is at the essence of the relationship between state and citizen. If we don't rebuild trust, it's very difficult for people to give more, to invest more, and to stay in the region. And your survey also showed countries where you have good services, you have a strong state, you have a capacity to take care of the population. We saw that the trust is high. And this is what motivates people. All these elements are at the heart now of any policy making, And this is where I see the future for the region.
Indeed, Dr. Jihad, that is a challenging mandate that you have created for governments in the region to be able to meet the needs of that optimism that comes through in this survey. Moving to you, Faisal, you've been a keen observer of the region for many decades. You have written commentaries for The Guardian, for the BBC, and other media outlets in the region. How do you evaluate the findings that around half of Arab youth are hopeful that their best days are ahead of them? How do governments, businesses, and civil society support that optimism? Kind of, the same question I asked Dr. Jihad, but how do you see this playing out?
It's an amazing finding, really an amazing finding. And it really stood out to me again in the middle of a pandemic. You have to think of it, I think, in terms of generational progress. Generational progress is one of those things that it's not particularly sexy to think about, but actually it goes to the heart of how publics interact with their governments. So if you think about something like market sentiment, which economists are always talking about, you need to have market sentiment for people to go out and buy things. Well, equally, you need to have the idea of generational progress for people to want to continue to live in the country. I was very pleased actually to see that the idea of young people to emigrate from the region has gone down, which is very positive. We do need to make sure that we keep the talent in the countries in which they are, because nobody needs more of a brain drain than we've already had. Equally, though, I think you asked about how to best manage the optimism, how we can actually make it concrete. Well, one of the ways is to ensure that there are good jobs in the region, but that those good jobs don't entail people from one part of the region moving to another. All of us are very familiar with the Gulf states. We know from your survey that a lot of young Arabs want to go and live in the Gulf states. I think there's an opportunity there for the pandemic. I think the pandemic has shown that we are able to create good jobs in local environments, and that they don't have to be physically located in the same place. So hopefully, just as we are having this wonderful panel across multiple countries, I hope we can create a scenario where you have businesses, perhaps in the Gulf, where a lot of the dynamism, the innovation is coming from, hiring people in other parts of the Arab world, and they can stay in other parts of the Arab world, a common language, and they can work virtually. These are the things that we think we need. We need innovative ideas from businesses and from politics in order to find ways to make sure that optimism becomes concrete.
Absolutely, Faisal. When you look at the region, in many ways, as you said, Faisal, the oil-rich and fairly wealthy Gulf states, the kind of troubled Levant sample, the region, and then you have the vast North African region as well. But when you look at all of this market of nearly 400 million people, the largest economy, Saudi Arabia, plays a very, very important role. And that comes the questions to Dania. How do you see the mood changing on the ground? The Vision 2030 happening. You see large projects moving apace. How do you capture the mood of Arab youth? What are they expecting? And what are the challenges that the government and the private sector and civil society, including NGOs like you, how do you see this optimism? How do you see this translating in real action on the ground, in the kingdom in particular?
Right. So, as mentioned, optimism alone is not enough, and it's exciting to see. However, I think the real change that we witness here, specifically in Saudi Arabia in different fields, has been really energizing to see youth and women in different sectors that we were just tapping into. So you see, we have a young minister of sport. We see women participating in sports in such a short time. So we have, women in Olympics now. This is a new field to look into, a new future, a new sector that they could really start working in. We just had our first champion, our Saudi champion, who was the rally driver, Saudi, a female that's actually a world champion. So we're not just driving our cars, we're really driving the economy, both youth, men and women. Other fields such as finance, you see women in finance. We have head of Tadawul, which is the biggest exchange market, is head by Lady Sarah Sahani. We have female ambassadors. And so it's real change. It's not just optimism. It's really paving the way for the youth that think about different fields that they can contribute and be also drive this change of the country. So I think that this change is real, it's fast, and I think with that, to tap on the let's say the challenges that face them, I think I always say this is that we need to bridge the gap between education and employment. We need to look at different new skill sets and mindsets that will prepare our youth for these jobs. And I think the pandemic taught us that this is a changing world. Who would have thought, that we would be locked down, not just in one country, but around the world, and how technology has brought us together, how we were able to work from home, learn from home. And so even with YouTube, you can learn new things. You can, edutainment is another important thing to look at. We need to bridge this gap. We need to put time on developing 21st century skills so that we can prepare them for the future.
Absolutely. All of them very, very important points, Dania. And I think not only for the kingdom, but the vast majority of the 200 million plus Arab youth across the region that we actually survey. Moving on to another subject, Dr. Jihad, one of the findings that came through the survey in a way quite interesting is that the majority of Arab youth feel their voice matters to their government, and they feel that their nations have the right policies to address their concern. It's a very good finding, but clearly there are regional differences as well. There are certain countries where there is much higher optimism, and in certain lower as well. What, in your experience, because you deal with many of these governments, do you think the policies are there? Do you think they need to change, especially with the growing unemployment in the region, which is a big issue?
I think this is also one of the manifestations that in certain countries, the way government dealt with the crisis, with the COVID-19 shock, gave to their citizens the feeling that they are in charge. And I think it's important to build on that. Confidence is the first step of trust. And we need to provide voice, we need to provide space, and also we need to allow leadership. We need to provide a voice through greater participation. We need to provide space for those who want to lead both in the public arena as well as also in the private sector to have and to be enabled to do so. And also we need to build new relationships whereby it's not the WASTA that gives you a job. It's the transparent information that allow you to make choices, that your leaders are leading by example, showing also that they are using wisely resources, they are respecting the rules, etc. If you do this, you create a new dynamic between citizen and state. And I think what we are seeing in terms of recent developments, Dania was mentioning Saudi, it's impressive how in a few years you can change practices that were here for decades. I think we are at a crossroad today. The aspiration of the youth is for positive transformation. They are willing to bet on the state. They want to stay in their region. They want to build better. I think we need to help them do this. And this is a great opportunity for us. This transformation that will happen after the COVID crisis will be radical. And if the region is not able to understand it and to accelerate its adaptation, the region will be facing a lot of headwinds in the future. And I see this survey, and I will conclude with that, as a good starting point for decision makers to look at where their youth are and build on that. And I think they can build really something that they will be happy with.
Indeed, it's an opportunity of a lifetime for the region's governments to build something for the future, especially meeting the high expectations of the youth. Having said that, Faisal, a question to you, and I know you've been following the survey over the years, and we've seen the highs on the euphoria during the Arab Spring in 2011, and then it kind of ebbed to much more kitchen table issue focus, about jobs, about homes, about kind of being able to handle their debt or starting their own businesses. And we've seen in this year's survey as well that the youth are now much more focused on kitchen table issues, on the here and now. What do you think in terms of the context of this tracking data over 13 years? Do you think that is surprising? Clearly, after a fairly difficult period of the pandemic and economic concerns and obviously rising unemployment, does that come as a surprise, or you think that is how the young people feel?
I mean, I can imagine that there are people who would think of it as a surprise. Personally, I do not, because I consider the revolutionary zeal of the Arab Spring to have been undergirded by these kitchen table issues. I've always believed that employment, cost of living, debt, private debt, personal debt, access to education, I've always believed that these are national security issues. We were talking about it, Jihad was talking about it in terms of economic headwinds. I think of it in terms of national security issues. If you do not get those parts of the society right, if you don't allow people to express the ideas that they have, the enthusiasm that they have for the future through public policy, then what you see is that they respond in a way you perhaps wouldn't like. All of the motivations of the Arab Spring came from kitchen table issues. And you see this reflected, I think, in the survey. Those issues haven't gone away. Cost of living is a terrible one. We've talked a lot about the positives about the survey. There are a lot of positives, but cost of living is stubbornly high. 90%, 89%, 82%, year upon year upon year, this cost of living isn't going away. So these economic questions, which ultimately are really political questions in my view, these political questions are the essence of how you make people feel that they have a better life. We've talked today about how sentiment is important. We've talked today about how policy is important. We've talked today about how this belief that the leadership knows what they are talking about. That is important. We've talked about innovative ways. Ani was talking about the innovative ways that we can help the youth. All of this stuff ultimately comes down to political questions. It comes down to what is the relationship between young people and the political environment in which they grow up. If we get that aspect of it right, you don't need to worry about revolution. As long as people feel the kitchen table issues are resolved, they won't be taking to the streets.
Absolutely. I think that's where I think more young people, there is the exuberance of youth that you see in the optimism, but they also are very practical minded. And, and that's why they're focused on getting on with life, which is very interesting, which brings me to, the final subject and the final question to you, Dania, which is the survey finds and increasingly that more young people, including Saudis, nationals, want to become entrepreneurs. Their dependence on jobs from the government, in fact, even from private sector, more and more of the Saudi nationals and in fact, Arab nationals, especially in the Gulf, want to be able to start their own business or join their family in their own business. What do you think of this trend? And what should governments do to be able to help these young people get on with, starting these new enterprises?
Well, honestly, I think we need to definitely encourage entrepreneurship. And there's a lot that can be done to support them, especially now with the pandemic. There was a lot of startups that were suffering. So I think programs being put in place, such as grants to start up your businesses or to grow your businesses. But personally, I think entrepreneurship is a mindset. The youth now, as you mentioned, all are feeling excited about, starting your own business and moving on. But I think that entrepreneurship should be everywhere. You should have entrepreneurship as a teacher. You should have entrepreneurship as a social entrepreneur, a happiness entrepreneur, really putting that spirit in everything that you do. Most of the youth, or let's say the older generation, was looking for a steady job. The youth now all feel excited to start their own businesses. And I think what I tell the youth really is do what you enjoy. Be passionate about what you do, whether it was starting your own business or being a teacher or being a chef. It's really putting your passion. And when you put your passion in something, you're going to excel in it. So it's not really just about starting your own business. It's really doing what you love. And that's where you'll be able to shine and you'll be able to give. And we all should have this entrepreneurship spirit, as I said.
That's a great answer, Dania. And I think what sticks in my mind is the happiness entrepreneur. I think that's a whole new category that we should focus on. Indeed, and I think that's where I think a lot of the energy should go, to be able to get people onto the jobs, because governments have maxed out. They can't create more jobs there. So I think that's a big positive sign. I'd like to end with one question that I'd like to ask all of you. Among the findings that you've seen, what is the one thing that you feel is the most important for you personally in the work that you do, in terms of what the Arab world should be latching onto? That one key finding. It could be about personal debt, it could be about education, it could be about any of the other findings. What is the one thing that has made the most impact on you? Maybe I start with you, Faisal.
Well, I mean, you know that I talk a lot about how there are similarities between the Middle East and the rest of the world. No region is an island. But in a sense, the pandemic has also shown us that we all have these issues that are happening in the wider world, but we all deal with them in a localized way. The 1/3 of Arab youth that have experienced a job loss, this was the finding of the survey, because of the pandemic, is really astonishing to me, really quite shocking, actually. I think I know that there are people on the call who deal with this much more closely, so perhaps they were not surprised by it, but I was definitely surprised that such a large proportion of young people have had such a direct impact from the pandemic. I think it makes it much more important that even though there was this optimism, you saw in the survey, there's optimism that the economies will bounce back. Some parts of the Arab world will bounce back much more quickly than others. But overall, I think we have to find out ways of integrating the region much more closely. The discrepancies were far too big. In the Eastern Arab world, they coped with it quite well. In other parts of the Arab world, particularly North Africa, and of course the financial crisis in Lebanon, they didn't cope with it well at all. So I think the solution to creation of more jobs, and also frankly to knowledge sharing among governments, which is something that Jihad and the IMF knows very well about, that you have to figure out ways to get best practice across the entire region. I think the answer to it, frankly, is to have much more close connection between these countries, close connection in politics, close connection in business, and ideally even close connection among the youth. We want to see much more of people moving across countries for education. Educational grants are part of that. The language is a problem. Some countries have different language requirements. But overall, I think if you can think of a way to bring the countries together much more closely aligned, I think you'll find that the next crisis, a war, a conflict, a pandemic, whatever it is, will actually be easier to weather.
Thank you. That was very, very impactful in terms of that finding of 1/3 of young Arabs lost jobs, and many of them haven't found those jobs even now when the survey was conducted. Indeed, that's one issue, Dr. Jihad, you look into very seriously when you talk to governments in this region. But however, what is your most important finding among the findings that you saw?
Sunil, I share very much what Faisal said, and I would like to build on it. I think this disparity and this uncertainty are the two big threats that I see today in the region. How to address this issue? Previous crisis showed us that if you react too little and you do too late, you react too late and you do too little, you cannot recover fast. And all these problems that your surveys are showing will amplify. Therefore, what I see today, I see a moment where what has been achieved in certain countries need to be spread to others. Accelerating vaccination is one. 2, access to opportunity should be the motto and should be the priority. And access to opportunity is by allowing people to innovate, to create their own jobs, and also to find jobs. If you find a job, if you have a decent work, this is how all your other problems can be addressed. And the level of unemployment is still high. And when you focus on the youth, you see that the unemployment is extremely high. Focusing on job creation, doing it in an innovative way by creating greater space for collaboration between countries in research, in education, in innovation. We saw some bright spots over the last year or two. Those are the area where decision makers need to focus. The last one is trust your people. I think what your survey is showing, which is something that we were all positively surprised by, the maturity of the assessment of the youth, of their present and their future. You need to trust your people, and you need to give them the opportunity to grow their dreams, and also to grow your economy. With that, what the state should do in addition to that is to preserve stability. Stability economically, socially, but also in terms of healthcare and protecting people's lives. If you do this, I'm sure that in the next 5 to 10 years, you will see greater transformation in the region.
That's a fabulous manifesto for governments to listen to, and I'm sure they're listening to you, Dr. Jihad. Thank you for that. And finally, to Dania, what is that one finding that grabbed you, that made you feel this is unusual or interesting?
Right. It's always hard to go last, yeah? After, having great panelists who've covered the majority.
Best for the last.
I hope so. I don't know, but I hope so. I can just highlight a few things maybe that I think are interesting, but not surprising, which is social media. And I think we didn't talk about that. Social media being a source of news for the youth. I think social media it needs to be called main media, no longer social media. It is the form of media. We've seen that a few days when WhatsApp was down and Instagram was down, and all the few social media was down. It was kind of difficult. We didn't know what to do. So I really think that social media is a great source of not just news, but news and education. And so I think that was a very important thing given the youth and social media per se. And the other thing is also how they felt about their governments and how they dealt with the pandemic. And I think there's a great feeling of pride here in Saudi in how the government and the society and everyone, whether expats or Saudis, lived here and dealt with this pandemic. So this has been a great source of pride and feeling that we're all in this together. And it was and I think the results show that as well, as society felt like they could depend on their governments and that they did a good job throughout the pandemic. So I think those are the two things I just wanted to highlight.
That's fantastic. Indeed, social media has such a power on society today. In fact, it makes things go around for sure. Thank you very much, Dania, for your views. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Jihad, who has got this time in a very busy schedule. And Faisal, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, my friend. So thank you very much, Dania. Thank you, Dr. Jihad. Thank you, Faisal. Thank you so much. That brings us to the end of our virtual launch event. I really thank you for joining us today, and I hope you found the findings and the insights from our panelists of great interest. You can find more information, more data and insights from our website, arabyouthsurvey.com. Do spend some time going through the findings. We have uploaded a white paper, which also includes commentary from experts that provide you with much more context to the findings. We look forward to your feedback on this year's edition, and I look forward to seeing you again in our next edition in the year 2022.